The first tab in the tool is the Instructions tab, which you see here on your screen. It is a printable page. It outlines what is on each of the subsequent tabs throughout the workbook, and it references some specific lines and some specific guidelines as the type of information that is entered on that tab, or in the case of tabs that are only reporting and don't have any data entry requirements, we'll talk about those too. So when you open up your tool, this will be the first page that you land on. It also includes some general characteristics of the spreadsheet tabs. Typically in the tool, we try and indicate data entry points through use of various colors. Typically they're in pale yellow. There are some exceptions in this tool. I'll highlight those as we move along. The tool is also locked, so there are only acceptable ranges of values in most of the cases of the data that you're entering. And if you do try and enter data that's not acceptable for that particular cell, then you are likely to get a warning in Excel. It may give you some additional guidance, but typically it's pretty straightforward. They are locked so that accidental data entry or data deletion can be avoided as much as possible. Many of the cells that are not color-coded for data entry are auto-populated, so that means simply that data that you enter in other locations in the tool will be populated for you automatically via some background formulas and calculations that are done to sum that up. For those of you who have used the LST tool in the past, you will note that there's been a removal of the macro feature, which used to delete certain pieces of information within the tool of a confidential nature. We have, I think, done a good job in the last few years, in the last couple of versions of the tool, to train everyone to be using coded values and not any type of individual youth information in the tool, particularly around the youth survey. So we felt that it was okay now to eliminate that sort of extra step to have an automated way of deleting that information. Okay, there are a few places in the LST tool that you may enter data and cells turn pink. If they turn pink when you're entering your data, if you're not quite finished entering data, continue and only worry about those if they remain once you're all the way done entering your data for the quarter. If there's any remaining questions about those that stay pink, there may be some guidance in the cells that might help you correct that. It's typically a situation, for instance, that you're stating that you have 20 teachers that are facilitating LST in their classrooms, and you say that 21 of them are trained. Well, because you can't have 21 trained people out of only 20 people, you may get a pink cell, and it would indicate that there's a possible data entry error. So that's an example of that. So that's it. That's the basics and the Instructions tab in a nutshell. And we're going to move on next to the process PMs. As I mentioned, this is a performance measure reporting tool. The major categories of performance measures are process performance measures, hence the process PMs tab, and outcomes performance measures. Process performance measures are simply counting of the how many things that we did. And the outcomes performance measures are usually changes, typically around pre and post testing, that we see in the participants in the program. So those are the outcomes of the program as opposed to the tracking of the process of the program. So at the top of this tab, you'll see that there's several yellow cells in rows 1 through 5. That's basic information around the grant and who the contact person would be if there were any questions. This is also handy when you're printing these out so that you have a little bit of information. So I have some fake information up here. Typically your PCCD grant's a 5-digit number. You'll see that there's the year that the grant began. This is an important cell. In D1, you want to make sure that that has the month of start of your grant. So if your grant started on July 1st, as an official start date, you would choose July, October 1st, January 1st, and April 1st are typical start dates for these types of grants. When you change that number, or when you change that entry, it changes the quarters in row 5 as to the reporting. So you'll see that I've switched that to April, indicating it's an April start grant, so quarter 1 is April through June. So the months are always in the same order in the LST spreadsheet, but the quarter reference changes. So I'm going to quickly switch that back to July where we were. And again, so now you'll see that quarter 1 is listed as July through September. Rest of the pieces of information, these are open text boxes that you can enter pretty much anything that is appropriate for that. Rather than LST, you could put, LifeSkills training at such and such school or something like that if you would like to. The contact name and phone and email would be the most appropriate person to contact if anyone had questions about the data in this tool. That would include EPISCenter staff, PCCD staff, or any other stakeholder that you might have printed this out for. Who would they contact if somebody was wondering about the data or the report of this tool? The performance measures P1 through P7, these are slightly out of order because as we add performance measures either in process or outcomes, we do try and keep a record of these numbers over time. Sometimes they're eliminated for tools. In this case, they're not eliminated. They're just in a different order where you find your P4, 5, 6 down here below. These yellow cells are where you would enter the total number as appropriately described in the performance measure each quarter. So I'll take particular note of the first two here. So here is your number of teachers or facilitators that have delivered LST lessons, and you report each teacher only once yearly. So each year, you're going to report the total number of teachers that are facilitating LST lessons in your classrooms. So in this scenario, the grant started in July. We have it listed that 10 teachers were delivering LST lessons starting in July. We can make the assumption that those same 10 teachers continued to facilitate LST through the rest of the year. In this scenario, in October through December, we're indicating that an additional teacher was added to the group of teachers that were facilitating LST. So one additional teacher now is facilitating LST with a total of 11 for the year. The performance measure below is the number of those teachers that are listed above that are officially trained or formally trained in the curriculum. So in some cases, we don't recommend it, but we may have a situation where only 10 of the teachers are implementing the program, but because of one thing or another in the process of implementing programs, one of the teachers was unable to attend the training. And then this teacher that came on late in October or December did not have the opportunity to attend the original training either. So ultimately you end up with 11 teachers facilitating LST, but only 9 of them have received the formal training. So you see how that's a good indicator of whether or not your facilitators have been, what ratio of your facilitators were officially or formally trained in the program. Number of buildings is simply tracking how many buildings are implementing LST. So this is physical locations. This can be a little left open a little bit to interpretation in the cases where you may have joined elementary, middle school, and high schools in a large district. You might want to consider those as being 3 different buildings, even though they may be in the same physical location. But it is just one looking at capacity of how many places the LST is being implemented. The Nexus Collaborative Board, we encourage all of the grantees, and PCCD also encourages everyone to be involved with your local collaborative boards. We hope that you would report on this project at least once per quarter to that collaborative board, but sometimes we do see additional numbers where collaborative boards may meet monthly. We would see up to maybe about 3 reports to a collaborative board in any specific quarter. So in this case, again, you're seeing the CUME is showing that there were 6 total meetings or reports to a collaborative board throughout the entire year. I won't get into the specific details of the process measures below. As you can see, the fact that they're not yellow, if I try and, whoops, this is an unlocked tool. Apparently I'm working in an unlocked tool. In the lock tool, you would not be able to delete that information, but it is also auto-populated for you here. So we'll talk a little bit more about that specifically as we move forward. One thing you may notice immediately about the Outcomes Performance Measure tab, there are no yellow cells. Everything here is pre-populated based on data entry from other tabs. So we won't have to spend a lot of time here, but we may reference this a little bit when we return back. These are constructs that, most of these constructs are connected to the LST Youth Survey. You also notice that the same information that I typed on the Process Performance Measure tab is carried over here. So where I actually entered Mr. Joe's staff here as the contact person, it's automatically carried through to the next tab. And again, that's for printing purposes and just keeping that, if you're printing these out as reports, to have that information handy at the top in the header. Observation log. We did make some changes to the observation log as it existed in the last version 3 of the tool. These 3 columns where you see quarter of observation, the lesson observed, and the fidelity rating are the key pieces of information that must be entered in order for data to populate into the process and outcomes performance measure tabs in those cases. We've adjusted the lesson observed to now be a drop-down list of all the lessons in the LST curriculum, level 1, 2, and 3. So if you use this drop-down list, you should be able to find not only level 3, lesson 6, but also its title of social skills. So I've just put in this example, I've just basically chosen one of each as you go down through this column. The quarter of observation is a drop-down, and you're going to specifically say when the observation happened, what quarter was the observation in. So was it physically in the months of October, November, December, or any of the other 3 quarters of the year. So you'll see I've chosen some different, made some different choices just as I move down the list here for our sample data. And then finally, the third is the score. So if you hover over tabs that have the small red triangles in them, that's an indicator of a comment in Excel. It'll give you some additional information. But we have simplified this. In the past, the past tool and the past Fidelity Checklist were broken into 2 scores, one for objectives and the second that included topics and activities. Those have been eliminated in the new Fidelity Checklist, so you're simply using a Fidelity Checklist. I can show you an example of one of those. I think we have it open here. This one. So as you go down through here, you'll see that these are either yes or no answers. So you're simply, to get your score, you're counting. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my scroll bar. So in this case, you see that you have 4, 6, 5. So we have, I think, 15, 22 total possible yeses. So your percentage that you're entering the tool is simply the number out of 22 in that case. Now the Fidelity checklists are different, so there are a different number of total possible points. So you're simply doing a math problem there. How many yeses did you mark out of how many total possible yeses there are? The threshold for acceptable fidelity as far as our evidence-based process and the norm that we use with all the evidence-based programs with PCCD is a 75% cutoff. So you'll see I put in 74 for a number of these and 75 for others. That accounts for the variation above. So there were a total of 10 observations made in October through December, according to the data that we entered, and 5 of those, these 5 75s, met the minimum fidelity level, and the rest of these 74 did not meet minimum fidelity. So the data is not only populating up here at the top of the observation log, but then it's carried over onto the Process PMs tab right here at the bottom. So this is performance measure 9 and 10. You'll see the same 10, 5, 15, 7, and so forth. So that's this data carried forward onto the process tab. The other pieces of information here, it will be good for your tracking if you want to make specific comments as a coordinator or the data collection person for your program, and any other key pieces of information. This will help you internally. It's not required for data calculation, but it will be very helpful for your tracking purposes internally. So next we have the LST Youth Survey. This is one place I did not mention in the observation log, but the LST Tracking Tab, which we'll get to in a moment, the observation log, both account for entering data around all 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3. On the LST Survey, Youth Survey tab, however, we ask that you only enter pre and post tests that are related to level 1 of the curriculum, the core curriculum. That is noted up here at the top as a reminder at the top of the tool. But just wanted to point that out, that there was a slight change with the observation and tracking, that we're tracking all of the levels, but only looking for the outcomes information based on the core curriculum. The first row here, row 3, is where I mentioned that you'd want to be very cautious not to have identifiable student names or information in here, but this is a way for the data entry person to make sure that their pre-test data lines up with the appropriate student's post-test information. So I will go specifically down through the pre-test section here to describe a few of the changes. Many of you who have used the LST survey in the past will note that it's now asking for a years of age rather than a date of birth. That is so the information is less identifiable for a particular individual. The gender has now added a third category of other. Again, if you're marking male or female, any other indication that the youth might make, you can use the other category for. So now there are 3 possible entries. This is an example where you click on a box and it's actually showing you what the 3 possible answers could be for that question. So you'll see in this case that the student one is in a vertical format, so you're entering all the responses from the pretest in a vertical format for this single student. The choices for family makeup have also changed. They've been greatly reduced in this tool to just 4, 1 parent, 2 parent. Guardian, foster parent, or relative is the choice 3, and 4 is the catch-all for any other possible family combinations that don't meet one of the 3 above. I think there may have been some small changes to the options under race and ethnicity, but they would be reflected here in the numbers 1 through 8. The last 3 questions are pretty much the same as they were in the past tool. Then we get into the nitty-gritty of the questions of the survey. One thing that I should note here is you'll notice some references on the left. These are references to what outcome measure that this data would be populated in. So you'll note that questions 1 through 7 here, and then there's some more 12 through 17 are all connected to outcome 4. That's a specific construct in the survey. So back on the Outcomes PM tab, you will see that outcome 4 is related to increased knowledge of drugs. There's also a reference here that it includes questions on the survey in section B 1 through 7 and section B 12 through 17. So that's where all the connections are being made between the survey and the population of data over to the Outcome PMs tab. I will point out one significant change to most of these core questions in section B and C and, B, C, and D. There was one question that was removed. Question 5, there was a huffing question that used to be between question 4 and question 5. So that did force a renumbering. Question 5 is now what used to be question 6 in the survey. So the whole entire survey has basically dropped by one question, but that's where the question was removed. And it was part of the outcome measure 5. So there are only 4 questions within the outcome measure 5 now construct where there used to be 5. Some of the other small changes, there were improvements to the survey in the way they were asking questions as they related to the person specifically or the participant in the survey. And it is escaping me at the moment, but it was references to pronouns that were being used, making the question more personable to the person who was being asked the question. So there were minor text changes in some of the other questions. Only that one question was removed. The EPISCenter had adapted a section E, which is related to descriptives around ATOD use and intentions. Knowing that there are some significant trends around prescription drug use in PA, the fact that LST had removed the huffing question above, we took this opportunity to switch the final question in each of these sections from what used to be a huffing or inhalants question to be around prescription drug. So you'll notice that there's sort of a rhythm to these 4 sections where they're asking about the same substances in a different way in each section. But we removed the huffing questions and replaced those with prescription drug questions. So questions 6, 11, 16, and 21 are different in that way from the last version of this tool. They are reflected in the new survey that Jordan will share with you. So all of this text has been corrected to match the survey that is available on our website. One additional thing that I did not mention, I think I failed, is the true-false questions up in section B. The correct answer is listed at the end of each question here in the survey tool. So it's a little bit of a backup to know that this question 1 should technically be answered false in order to be correct. In this sample data, this person did not answer correctly. So that's what these numbers at the end of each of the questions in section B are. I'm going to scroll down here now. The most important thing to know is in between the orange pre-test section and the green post-test section is a very bright yellow bar that asks you what quarter that the post-test was done. So whatever quarter the post-test happened in is the choice that you would make here. Again, this allows the tool to populate the data into the appropriate quarter in the Outcomes tab. But then in the post-test section is simply a mirror copy of post-test questions in green. So orange is the pre-test, green is the post-test below. But it is just simply a mirror of all of the pre-test questions asked again in a post-test scenario. So that's pretty much it. You have the ability, I think, to enter up to 800 students in here across. So you're entering each student down, but there's room for 800 students across the entire tab. If you have a LST implementation that's going to implement Core 1 with more than 800 students in a year, please contact your EPISCenter implementation specialist, and they'll help you work that out. Typically, we have folks break that implementation into appropriate groups like buildings or grade levels or things of that nature in order to make sure that it meets the needs and can still fit everyone. LST tracking. This tab is the same and has not changed significantly. Again, you see some highlighted columns here. Those columns are absolutely necessary in order to populate the information about both how many youth have participated or have been served. So row 3 is all of the youth that have been served that have been inputted into the tracking form below, and row 4 is all of the youth that have completed that. So the completion is denoted by how many lessons were taught. So you have 24 youth in Mrs. Apple's classroom. It was LST level 1. It was 6th grade, and there were 12 lessons taught. So if it passes the threshold of how many lessons should be taught for that grade level, in that grade, then it will populate above, showing of the 130 youth that took level 1 in October through December, 24 of those in the scenario below with the fake data fully completed the program. And there were 6 cycles completed. So that would basically be an entry for each of these rows. The additional white columns in here are great for tracking. It helps your data entry person to know if they've entered the pre or post test data, for instance, for each of those, when those implementations of LST started and ended. It's great additional tracking information, but poor data entry in these does not necessarily cause any problems with your ultimate number, but it could be quite confusing for your data entry person. So the yellow cells are crucial to data population on the Outcomes tab and Performance Measures tab, but not the white cells in these cases. So that concludes most of the sections where you actually have to do data entry. So these tabs, so your Process Measures tab, your Observation, Youth Survey, and LST Tracking are the places where data is actually inputted. Outcomes tab is all auto-populated, and the additional tabs that we will all see now are all different types of summary report. There's a little bit of an addition to this tab. It now reflects the new groups as far as family makeup and gender. We've also added a percentage of the total count. The tool used to just give you a count and a total. We've added in the percentage now so that you can see that 11 out of 33 was 33.3% of the youth were male. So again, this is out of core level 1, and because it is related to the pre and post youth survey tracking tab. The next is descriptive. So this is a little bit more of a breakout of pre and post for the youth survey tool. So it's just a summary tab that can be printed out. Again, there's no data entry that needs to be done here. It's for printing and reference purposes only. And then finally, there's a descriptive tab that shows a breakout for the various substances related to cigarettes, alcohol, drinking, marijuana, intentionally getting high in the case of use. And then the key change again is that we are now using the last group of questions for prescription drugs rather than the huffing questions that used to exist in Section E. but this is a great another way of looking at that use intent and perception of peer use, another printout. The Logic Model tab has not changed, but this is a great printable and valuable reference. It shows how certain proximal outcomes are linked to the different outcomes in the Outcomes tab. So you see outcomes 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8 listed here. So there are call outs throughout here to show you what those connections are to your summary data. We have added 3 additional reference tabs. So to help folks out with, for instance, the LST Tracking Tab, you'll now see that these are printable PDFs also from the LST website, but level 1 has a total of 14 different lessons. Some of them are often take more than one classroom to complete, but you'll see that level 1, lesson 2 is making decisions. So that's a direct reference back to your tracking tab, or sorry, your observation log tab, where level 1, session 2 is making decisions. So that's where the connections of those are, but these are also printable, give you some additional information about the lesson goals and the key skills for each of those different titled lessons in level 1. Then there's a tab for level 2, the booster, and level 3 booster sessions. So that concludes the brief rundown of the changes and an overview of the LST Data Tool tab. I am going to unmute the folks in the Zoom room now, and you're welcome to take turns asking questions.
Roger, this is Amanda Lane. I have a question about the LST tracking with the number of lessons taught.
Sure.
Does that, when you look at the scope and sequence, is that counting the optional lessons as well?
It is based on a minimum threshold, which I apologize for not knowing off the top of my head, but there's a minimum threshold of how many lessons you teach in order for the youth to be considered completed. So I don't know how that's directly related to the optional lessons versus required lessons.
Okay.
But it was a threshold that was agreed to with the developer as a sort of a completion level. It's probably, I would guess that it may be 70 or 80% of possible lessons taught.
Thank you.
And we can give you a more detailed answer, but I just don't have it handy in front of me.
Thanks. That's okay. Thanks.
Sure. And thanks for your question.
And I have one more question, actually. So we're at the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence, and we go into the school districts where we have classroom observers observe the teachers. Right. And so one of the things that we do with the observations is we have the fidelity rating the way that you have it here, which is out of all possible points. And then separately, we have what we call a CAP score, which is giving credit to the fact that they're not necessarily required to teach all points in a single lesson. They can carry it over to the next unit or the next class session, for instance.
Right.
And so I was wondering, looking at your example, tend to, the way that it's implemented through PCCD, do a lot of your implementers do it in one session only?
I can't answer that myself. I don't know whether either of our implementation specialists can. They might have to look that up also.
Yeah, I'm unsure of that answer.
Okay, we found that when we did ours, our what we call, sort of the total possible number of points is really quite low often for the teachers that have short class periods or at least taking their time. And so we've given that sort of as a more liberal approach to period here. And so for us, it's a really nice way to sort of balance it somewhere in between.
Right. I think I would say that our intent in most cases with these tools, as far as the EPISCenter's intent, is it's sort of a rougher correlation to fidelity, and the goal is really to teach the importance of tracking and observation to maintain fidelity to the program. Most of the providers our data for the observations typically are beyond the threshold for youth completion and for the observations. So we see pretty high rates of completion and observation fidelity to the model.
Roger.
Yes.
This is Lisa. Just going back to the fidelity observations, we've been doing this. This is our second PCCD grant, a different group of LST schools. But if we're doing an observation and the staff person runs out of time, we still use the fidelity observation for that lesson. So if they don't cover all the materials, they don't necessarily get the full score, but we explain that in the narrative when we report back to PCCD. If there was a situation where, there was perhaps there were school, cancellations and they had less time, or there was an assembly or something where kids were being pulled out of the class and there was some disruption. So, maybe the class period ended up being 30 minutes. We would just indicate that.
Yeah, that's an excellent example of real-world implementation. And sort of to piggyback on what I said earlier, yeah, the goal here is that observations and tracking of the program, particularly doing startup or when teachers are learning to implement a program or implementing the first time, that's when observations are most important as far as a training and understanding that they're doing the program with fidelity. Beyond that, there's the sort of the maintenance idea where you do observe a certain amount of the lessons sporadically so that you make sure that you're maintaining fidelity to the program. But it's not really about the burden or the education at that point, sort of the scale up of the program, but then it's about the monitoring of the long-term sustainability to the fidelity of the model. These are great questions. Thanks.
Roger, I just have one more question. This is Karen, also from CSPD, here with Amanda.
Sure.
So just to clarify then, the pre and post that's being used for this tracking file, the spreadsheet, matches identically with what is on the LifeSkills training website. Is that correct?
No.
No? Okay. There are some differences.
It should be, the first section should be the same. So this tear-off sheet and pages, tear-off sheet and pages, so basically pages up to 7 are exactly pulled from the national website. It isn't until you get to section E that there's been some edits and some revisions. That would be pages 8 and 9 of the tool that's available on our website. But pages 1 through 7 are the exact one that's pulled from the national website.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Yeah.
Great. Well, Jordan and Janine and myself are always ready to answer additional questions. Anytime. You can contact us via phone, through the EPISCenter website, and or email. Jordan is the primary on the project at the moment, so most things would get funneled through her. If they become a sort of a more technical nature, troubles with the tool, data entry problems, and things of that nature, she would pass those on to me to troubleshoot and or solve for folks. But if they're program or process related, it would typically be handled at the implementation specialist level.